My name is Mark Horowitz. I am the director of the Sheva Center at JCC Association. JCC Association is the umbrella organization for JCCs across the United States and Canada. And we in the early childhood department, we work with 125 schools across the United States and Canada and support them and help grow them. And all of the schools that you have here that are listed are schools that we love and care for and spend a lot of time with. And we are so thrilled that you are here tonight. And I have an introduction to give you for Dr. G, except I have to start by saying, we did this last night with her, and if we had the opportunity, we would do it every night for the rest of our lives. You are in for an incredible treat. I want to just show you very quickly my colleagues up here, if I can find them. This is Mackenzie Adams, and this is Kathy Pomer, and we're all together tonight to make you happy by bringing you Dr. G. And the three words that are in Dr. G's bio that I did not do last night, but are so important tonight are truth, resilience, and my favorite, candor. These are the messages that she brings to today's busy parents. She's an internationally renowned speaker, challenges people to bring out the best in themselves and others, and for nearly a decade has empowered families to beat the expectation gap and uses these same strategies to help parents foster productive, empowered, and accomplished children. You may have seen her already on the Today Show, on The Doctors, on Rachel Ray, Good Morning America, and on and on and on, writing in Huffington Post. Pick up her books. She's the author of Get the Behavior You Want, and she is a practicing family physician. And tonight you are in for just an incredible treat. So sit back and enjoy the ride. Dr. G.
Thank you, Mark. If you ever need a cheerleader in your corner, Mark is an amazing cheerleader, right? Like he makes you feel fantastic. And I'm so glad to be here with you. If I look a little bit like it's the middle of the night, it's because here in Pennsylvania, it's the middle of the night. I'm really glad to be able to do this in a time zone or a time that works for you. And please let anybody you know, if you find this useful, that they can catch the replay in about a week, or we're doing this live one more time next Tuesday at around 10 p.m. Eastern, whatever that means to you. Colorado, I think that's 5 in the morning. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you guys about what it's like to be home with preschoolers. And I recognize that some of you are also home with adults, kids older than that, and what it's like to be home with preschoolers in a totally new way for most of us. There are some people who are home with preschoolers who are often working from home and juggling their preschoolers, or are used to being the primary caregiver and are now sharing that role a little bit more with another adult who's also trying to work from home. But most of you send your kids to at least the, maybe not that 5-week-old yet that we just saw, but most of you guys probably send your kids to early childhood. And those programs are filled with wonderful people that your children love and that they might be missing, and their structure and routine that they're used to has been thrown upside down, and so has yours. And also, this is unprecedented times. So you're experiencing at least uncertainty and perhaps fear, frustration, anger, worry. So I want to talk about how we keep parenting in that time. And we are going to talk about how to navigate the trouble spots that come up, but we are also going to talk about 2 really fantastic opportunities that you have in this and how easy they can be to take advantage of. So I am not a pie in the sky. Everyone should have a beautiful chart and stickers and stars and breathe in the joy of being with your kids every moment. No. I am a realist and I'm a parent. My kids are, as of this moment, 11 and 13 and 15 and 17, which means I had 4 kids under the age of 6 at one point. So I totally get that 85% of parenting is pretty much inventory management. Do you have all your kids? Do they have all their stuff? Are they hurting each other? No? Fantastic. As a matter of fact, whenever we were leaving anywhere with our kids and I would turn to their dad and say, oh, I think we forgot something, he would say, we have all of the kids. We win. Everything else is just stuff. And a lot of what we have to remember during this time is to give ourselves that same kind of grace. This is new and different. There's no way to already be good at this. Michelle's here from Longmeadow, and she says her kids are 4 and 1.5. Nadine is here from Portland with 7 and a 3.5-year-old. Julie's here from Savannah with a 2-year-old and also a 2-month-old. And I'm going to guess at the pronunciation, Yuhi or Yuji Pan from Vancouver, doing early childhood as an educator. I'm so glad you guys are all here, because for those of you who have really, really tiny kids and those of you who maybe have some elementary school age kids, this is a ton to juggle. So let's start with talking about those difficult to navigate trouble spots. The first one is feeling guilty. Guilt is one of the most common parenting emotions, not just during this time, but wherever I go around the world talking to parents, one of the common themes is feeling inadequate, feeling somehow like an imposter, like my kid's preschool teacher, they know that I'm not the best parent for my kid, or my kid would be so much better off with somebody else, or my friend has it so much more together than I do, and they're not struggling the way I am. And I want to call shenanigans on all of that, because the first thing to keep in mind is that guilt is just not useful. Now, remorse, totally. When you lose it on your kids, you should feel some remorse for that. You know why? Because it will cause you to go back to them if they're verbal at all, meaning not so much the 2-month-old, but if they're verbal at all, and say, hey, I had a really strong reaction, or I had trouble with my temper, or I needed to put myself in timeout for a minute, and to say, I'm sorry, I don't want to treat you that way, and I'm going to try hard not to do it again. And I want to remind you in that moment, what you're doing isn't just trying to fix something you wish you hadn't done. You are modeling for your kiddo how to handle it after you didn't behave the way you wish you did. They do that all the time, and they need practice apologizing and practice trying to fix it for next time. But the best way for them to learn all that is the same way that they're learning to talk, and the same way they're learning to play, and the same way they learn to dance, and what music is good, and that's by modeling. So you show them something really valuable when you apologize, but please don't bother feeling guilty. As long as you are showing up, you're here. And however today went, you show up again tomorrow with good intention and the best behavior you can pull off. That's what parenting is. Parenting is a long game. And we change our kids not by spraying them with a fire hose. Picture a rock. If I have a rock and I spray it with a fire hose, I will get a really clean rock in exactly the same shape it was in. But if I want to change that rock, if I drip a drop of water an hour, for years, I can change the course of rivers. That rock entirely changes shape. Our kids do really well with slow, gentle when you can pull it off, repetition. Lots and lots of repetition. Anybody who might be a cartoon fan from back in the day might remember Foghorn Leghorn, who says, I say, repetition is a learning tool. I say repetition is a learning tool. That is a lot of how our kids remember things. And that feeling of guilt, in addition to not being useful, just puts kids in a kind of uncomfortable position of a different power balance than is what feels normal and natural to them. Which brings me to something I really want to talk about as a trouble spot, and that is boundaries. A webinar that I did earlier today for a different organization, somebody said, look, my toddler, who's usually a pretty mild-mannered kid, is having a lot of trouble, like really acting out, throwing things, spitting at us, really behavior we haven't seen in a couple of years. And this is a mom with a lot of experience and several kids already. She said, I know how to handle this under normal circumstances, but right now, I understand the big emotions that he's dealing with, and I have so much empathy that it doesn't feel right to give him a consequence. Whereas a month ago, I totally would give a kid who did that a consequence. Now, I just can't bring myself to do it, even though I see his behavior starting to negatively impact my older kids too. Because if you have more than one active kiddo, and I don't mean babies in arms, but active kids, you'll see behavior is contagious. So when you let something go in one kid, everybody else tries it out. Even when you correct it in one kid, other kids will try it. I had this amazing experience of walking down the street with my 4 boys. One is in the stroller. The other 3 are walking around. My 7-year-old runs up and grabs this enormous stick. It looks like a trident belonging to a Greek god. It's got these huge pokey things on the end, and he starts swinging around, and I'm like, put that down. And he does, which was bliss for his 5-year-old brother, who's like, he let go of that without a fight and ran up and grabbed it. And I was like, no, you have to put that down right now, young man. So he reluctantly puts it down. So the 3-year-old is like, yes, finally, and runs up and grabs it. And I was like, what? And I get him to put it down, and the 1-year-old in the stroller starts screaming for the stick. So correcting one kid doesn't fix everybody. Please don't think that. But if you don't correct a kid and you let that behavior go, you will see it pass far more contagiously than coronavirus. So what I want to say to you is, there are some things that I want you to really relax and show yourself a lot of grace about and not worry about being so tight about. But there are a few things I want you to really stick to as best you can, as best as works for the culture of you and your family and your kids. One of those things is having some kind of schedule. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be color-coded. It doesn't have to be printed out and put on the wall. Although if you can, I just want to mention that if having a printed schedule to refer to every day wasn't useful, pretty much every kindergarten teacher in the world wouldn't bother doing it. And they do. So if you can have some kind of schedule that, honestly, no matter how well you stick to it today, you still reference it tomorrow. And you can be flexible, and after a week or after even a couple of days, you can fix it, you can adjust it, you can move it. But having a wake-up time that's about the same, having a bedtime that's still bedtime, and then during the day, having meals, having snacks. Isn't it amazing how hungry these kids are and how often they have to eat? But if you remember when you were pregnant, for those of you who were pregnant, you also wanted to eat very, very often. It's because their bellies are the same size as their fist. So this is the size of my stomach, but their stomach's like this big. So it empties pretty quickly. They need to eat on a pretty regular schedule. They need snacks that are somewhat healthy and pretty regular, and they need some touchstones. And here's where I want to give you a couple of hacks, things that can make your life a little easier, because you might be thinking, if I had time to entertain and keep my kid on a preschool schedule, I wouldn't need to send them to preschool. And I do need to send them to preschool. I totally get it. And yes, your work is going to have to flex, or the other things you're used to doing are going to have to flex some. However, please take advantage of the resources of living online, not just for times like this, but a lot of libraries around the country are doing lap sits where you sit with your kiddo in your lap, but there is a librarian reading a new story to your kid. If you have grandparents or other adults that your child misses seeing, then they miss your kiddo too, I bet. And get them, if they're willing, to do a half an hour at bedtime a couple of nights a week. Now, if you have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old who's all over the place, you're gonna have to be within eyesight of that kiddo. You can't be like, you stay upstairs and read that book with grandma, I'll be downstairs finally relaxing, by myself. But that interaction with someone else puts you at least in the secondary role, in the assistant role, as opposed to having to be on all the time. Take advantage of anything that you can do. If you can get into a conversation with other parents and say, hey, can we set up a virtual play date? Even though your 2-year-old might wander to the screen and wander away, they will still enjoy that interaction. It will still take the focus off of you a little bit. And your 2-year-old won't have to share their toys, which is kind of fun for them. There are all kinds of opportunities and ways to take little bits of your schedule. And those things can be at different times, when you get around to it, when you think of it. But I want you to look for ways to delegate what you can still delegate. There's nothing to feel guilty about there. Schedules do help kids, but give yourself some grace. When you miss the mark with the schedule or you had to be flexible, kids can handle that. They just need to preview some kind of structure of about what they can expect. Another thing I really want to talk to you about structure is where kids sleep. It's really tempting, especially in times of uncertainty, for a lot of parents to pull kids into their bed. And there's nothing dangerous about doing that with a child who's over a year old. But if you don't want that to be your normal, don't do it very often. Because once you break that barrier, it can take, and I'm not joking, legit years to get that kid back into their own bed every night. So if it's comfortable for you and it's part of your family culture and you like that, wonderful. But if not, please don't do it. And if you have newborns, They can't sleep in the same bed as an older kid. They cannot, because there's just too much risk of SIDS from that. Okay. Another thing I really want you to think about is the behavior that you allow in your kids. This can be a real struggle spot. That mom who was saying, you know, I totally get why my kiddo is acting out. We should still hold kids to good behavioral standards. We can't hit, we can't bite. Not that they don't. We just say, hey, nope, that's not okay. There's a consequence for that, or we don't do that, whether you're distracting them or giving them a consequence for that, or you sit down and have a conversation, or they have to be separated and distant from the person that they were mean to. There's a few good reasons for doing this. One is you want to live in a home that's got some shalom bayit, where things are not a wrestling match where people are fighting to the death every day. The second reason is we're showing kids how they should expect to be treated by others. And I don't, even at this young age, want you to give the message to your kiddo that when someone they love is upset, that's a free pass to treat your child poorly. So don't let your child treat you. If you know, teach them. I'm not saying, you know, that they bit you so you let them bite you. I'm saying don't let it go. Don't say it's okay or excuse it away if they treat someone, you or anyone else, in a way that you wouldn't want someone to treat them. The third reason, and I think the most compelling at the moment, is when we relax our standards in ways that kids notice. Not, hey, tonight you can have a special dessert, or tonight we're going to stay up a little later. But when we change those fundamental rules of behavior, we make kids really scared. They think, oh my gosh, the world is upside down. Speaking of the world being upside down, let's talk about one of the big trouble spots for parents right now. And that is, how do we talk to our kids about what's going on? Hey, I want to mention to you that if as I'm talking, you have questions that come up that I don't address or that you want to push on, please put them in the chat, because we're going to watch that and we will get back to all of your questions. How and how much do we talk to kids about what's going on? Okay, the first thing I want to say to you is you don't have to be transparent with your preschoolers or even your early elementary schoolers, but please don't lie to them. I had a question on a different webinar that I was doing where a parent said, well, so far we've just told our kids that spring break got extended. How's that? And I said, please don't do that. I totally understand the urge that you have to protect your kids from scary or painful knowledge. However, there are a couple of great reasons to talk to kids at an appropriate developmental level about what's happening. The reason I say don't lie is because that is something else that makes kids feel really fundamentally unsettled and uncomfortable. I know you've lied to your kids and you're good at it. Most parents have. Oh, I'm sorry, the batteries in that toy can't ever be replaced. Weird. I guess we'll never hear that annoying noise again. Or, no, honey, the 24/7 market is closed. We can't go in and get that snack that you really wanted. Or, no, that friend that drew on all of our walls that one time they came over, they moved to Granada. Sorry. When we are upset, when we are uncertain, when we are dealing with something stressful and difficult, our kids do pick up on our emotions. And when we can't give them any, and I'm not talking about a coherent or a logical explanation, I'm saying when we give them cues that we're not being straight up with them, they start to blame themselves for what's going on. They start to feel like they must have done something wrong because they are hyper egocentric beings and everything's about them. Developmentally, that's appropriate. It's not that they're bad people. It's just they can't think outside of them. You know, a lot of your kids think that you drop them off at preschool, you go out the door and wait in your car for 9 hours and come right back in and pick them up. They have no sense of you having any kind of experience or life or work, even though you mention work, whatever that is, beyond when they're there. So I want you to really consider that you do some damage when you lie, and you don't have to lie. You can say any number of things if your child asks you something that you don't think is appropriate to answer. Here's an example. Let's say that you decide you're gonna have a little bit of a conversation. You're not gonna lie when your child says to you, why do we have to stay inside? And so you say, for example, and now I'm thinking about a neurotypical 3.5-year-old. Why do we have to stay inside? Oh, there's a new sickness And we have to give everybody a chance to get used to it. So staying home means that the sickness goes around slower, and that's safer for everybody. Okay, so I gave one, maybe two pieces of information there, right? Then I wait. But let's say my kiddo comes back with something big and hard that's developmentally maybe I don't think is right to answer them about. And they say, well, how many people have gotten sick from this? And you don't want to say 500,000 people in the world have confirmed cases of this. That's too big for this 3.5-year-old. So you say, a lot, actually. And we're going to do our part by slowing it down. See what I did there? I didn't lie. You might not even say a lot. You might say, I don't know exactly how many, but we're going to do our part. So you were honest. You probably don't know exactly how many unless you are running epidemiology for the CDC or the World Health Organization. And you make the judgment that you're not ready to give them a number. And then, and this is the magic of being a parent, you incorporated a value. You weren't just giving information, you're also teaching a lesson. You're saying, we're going to help. You are an expert in the kids who live in your home. I'm a parenting expert on the 4 kids who live in my home. You know these little people as well or better than anybody else in the world. So you know what they could stand to learn from this, what they're ready to learn. And it might be about helping, or it might be about washing their hands, because I can tell you that even 11-year-olds sometimes walk out of the bathroom with suspiciously dry hands, or have brushed their teeth with a toothbrush that's entirely untouched. So you might choose to make this about that skill that you're working on right now. That's why we're going to wash our hands, actually, with soap. Oh, and water too. I want to tell you guys about a really interesting study that was done on 2 villages that were nearby one another in Africa some years ago. Health workers were going in to try and prevent the spread of foodborne illness. And they said in one village to a group of kids, to all the kids, you need to wash your hands right after you use the bathroom so that you don't get sick. In the neighboring village, which was similar in terms of language and religion and culture, they said to all the kids, you need to wash your hands right after you go to the bathroom every time so that you don't get your younger siblings or your grandparents sick. And they saw quadruple the rate of hand washing when they told kids that how to protect other people. Even young kids want to help. They want to know that they impact others. When I do my talks about giving little kids chores and helping them get involved in Tikkun Olam, social action, and saving the world, I always talk about how darn helpful they want to be. How many times have you heard from a verbal preschooler or toddler, me do it? What are you doing? I want to do it. If you're sweeping, I want to sweep. If there's something that needs to be cleaned up, if you're sad, I want to cheer you up. So I want you to really take advantage of that and focus on the lesson, even more than on the facts. It's really okay not to tell them the whole truth, but please tell them something. Because I want to talk now in the last 5 minutes before we get to questions about those 2 opportunities that I mentioned. And by the way, I'm seeing the questions that are coming up about screen time. We're gonna talk about it, I promise. But here are the 2 opportunities I don't want you to miss. You're gonna build trust with your kids. This first one is easy because all you gotta do is be with them. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be intentional. You don't have to be sparkling. You don't have to have jazz hands or make different voices for different characters in their book. You just gotta be there. You gotta be there with some authenticity so that when you're frustrated or you're having a hard time or you're not as patient as you wish you were, that's me every day, certainly right now, you just say, man, that wasn't what I wanted to say there. Can I have a do-over? Can I try again? And you keep showing up. And however today went, tomorrow you get up and you're still there. You're building a lot of trust with your preschoolers. I don't want anybody to worry that kids are going to get academically behind by being home at this age. For centuries, we've homeschooled preschoolers. Early childhood has so many enrichment opportunities, and it really does help kids. But to be home for even a couple of months is going to be okay for them. And what they're getting from this is a reminder that the foundation under them, their family at home, is solid and is there and isn't perfect and has jokes and people fart and people get mad and people break stuff or spill stuff, and then we're still there. And that cycle of seeing that there are good days and there are hard days and there are good moments and there are hard moments, and we're still here with each other, builds trust. So just by being there, you're already taking advantage of one of the opportunities. The other one takes a little bit more intentionality, but please don't be worried, because even with really young kids, this is really possible and it's not hard. Because I want to point out to you, one of the real, I don't want to say blessings, but one of the truths that we've noticed so far about coronavirus is that it is least deadly for little kids, kids 0 to 9. Newborns are a separate thing, and certainly there are kids who have health problems that put them at higher risk. But in general, younger kids seem to be handling the coronavirus well. They are still in danger of catching it, but they seem to have, in general, fewer symptoms. And although they certainly can transfer it to other people, and you got to treat them all like they're infected little vectors all the time and keep them away from grandparents and don't let them touch stuff like pet other people's dogs or anything, they're probably going to be okay from this. What we know for sure about all of these kids is that in their lifetime, they are going to experience other periods of disruption and upheaval in their own lives, and maybe in their communities, and maybe even in society like this. So the opportunity I want you to think about is the opportunity to show them how we handle disruption and uncertainty. So how is that? Well, it's through expressing how we feel without hurting anybody. It's by looking for some things we can control and starting to learn a little bit about self-regulation, about what makes us feel better when we're sad. So with your verbal kids, one of the things I would encourage you to do in the next week or so is to sit down with them and each of you make a list. You're going to have to help them because most of them do not read and write. And they can certainly draw pictures of each thing, but you're going to want to write a word down so you remember what it was the picture was supposed to be, of all the things that they can do that make them feel better when they're sad. So there might be a picture of hugging you. There might be a picture of a stuffed animal or some other comfort item. They might say that there's music that makes them feel better, or doing puzzles, or doing jumping jacks, or having a pillow fight, or tickling, or drawing art, or watching a video, or playing a game, whether it's a video game or a board game or whatever it is. I would love for that list to be as long as possible. And then I want them to circle the stuff that they can do while they're social distancing. So help them with that, because that experience of figuring out how we soothe ourselves when things are hard, and some of them are straight up distractions, and some of them are really positive, looking for something nice you can do for someone else. Some of them are totally neutral, but whatever they are, a growing list of ways that you comfort yourself that aren't damaging to yourself or anyone else, that's a really important life skill. That's something they're going to be able to use when their best friend's birthday party gets canceled, not even because of coronavirus, just because. That's something they're going to be able to use when they lose the baseball game, or when they don't get put in the homeroom class that they wanted to be in. There are lots of moments of disappointment, of frustration, of experiences that are really hard. And the more practice they have managing upheaval, disruption, uncertainty, the stronger they're going to be. Okay, let's get to some of these questions. Mark, you in? All right, I'm going to read a couple and start to answer them, but as they go, if one gets by me, I hope you guys will let me know. So here's a question about screen time.
We will.
Do you think it's okay to give more screen time than normal? Library books being read on the TV, FaceTiming with family, educational shows, etc. My kids are 3 and 1. We really don't want the baby to get used to screens. Thank you. Okay, so I do want to say that in general, the idea of having an older child and your younger kiddo not lusting after screens, that's a really aspirational goal. That's hard. But I want you guys to try something that's going to be useful to you for your kids' whole childhood. I'd like you to stop thinking about screen time as a yes or a no, and start to think about it in the exact same way that you think about nutrition, about the food that you offer your kids. Because they need food, and it's going to become really clear in the next weeks and also in the next years that they need some screen interactions. They're going to need it for school. They're going to want it socially. It's just becoming more and more of a ubiquitous part of our lives. And also, they will need it in their careers. They won't be able to be adults without being facile on screens. So you think about it like you think about nutrition. You wouldn't feed your 1-year-old as much food as you would offer your 3-year-old. And you be careful, right, about the content, what's in the food that you're giving kids. So there's some kinds of screen time that are like green beans or broccoli. They're really healthy. FaceTiming a grandparent, hearing a story read, for a slightly older kid, doing math problems. This is what my kids call broccoli screen time. Quantity matters for sure. Even if my kid loved broccoli, actual broccoli, the food, I wouldn't let them sit down at the table and eat broccoli from 8 in the morning until 10 at night without stopping. At some point, I would say, hey, step away from the Jolly Green Giant. That's enough. You got to stop and do something else. So content and quantity. Content. So there are some things that are broccoli screen time. There are some things that are ice cream or cookies screen time, right? That's like either just totally useless, like they want to watch the same video of a bulldog skateboarding that lasts 12 seconds 400 times, which, by the way, just like they want to hear the same story over and over and over again, and they find that really comforting. They want to watch the same video over and over and over again because the fact that it comes out exactly the same, that's really comforting. And, or it's something that you're like, you know, that's really kind of extra, like the music videos that your older sibling is watching that you want to watch. That's an every once in a while thing, and we got to be really careful about how much and what's in there. There are some kinds of screen time for kids that are like alcohol. You wouldn't give your kid alcohol, and you won't, or even soda perhaps at this age, I hope. And you wouldn't let them, for example, watch someone play Grand Theft Auto or for other first-person shooter game. There definitely are things that are just absolutely no in no amount. And there are some things that you're like, you know, you can have a fair amount of that. During this time, I'd like you to give yourself some grace about that quantity. It's going to be a little bit more than usual. Just like you're going to have more junk food, perhaps when you take that trip to Disney World or Disneyland, than you do in a normal time period in your lives. This is a different time. And one of the places that it really is okay to relax the bar a little bit is about quantity. Be careful of content. That's a much bigger deal. So please don't, for the person who asked this question, think that FaceTiming with family and educational shows is the exact same thing as playing a skateboarding video game. Heather says we have the same screen time question with the 5-week-old. We're exhausted and our 21-month-old is getting a ton of screen time. Yes. How fun for the 21-month-old, right? Don't feel guilty about this. I totally get it. I was born right as the television was, you know, there were Senate hearings about how we were creating a generation of boob tube watchers. That's what they used to call TV, right? Any of the, like Mark or Kathy, you guys might remember, boob tube was what they used to call the television. And there were Senate hearings about this. So just like there are Senate hearings, well, not right now, but a few months ago on social media and the dangers and risks, there were Senate hearings about how dangerous television was. And when my parents were growing up, there were Senate hearings about how dangerous rock and roll was for kids. Every generation is going to have something where we're like, whoa, we have this tiger by the tail. We don't know what's going on. Could this be damaging for kids? Yes, too much screen time can be damaging for kids. But right now, give yourself a little grace about the quantity, okay? Okay, I find the late afternoons to be the most difficult with my 3-year-old. Yes, it is the witching hour. I've definitely heard people say this is why that's cocktail hour. It has nothing to do with bars. It's all about parent experience at home. And I am not suggesting that you drink during that time. It won't help. But he gets more physical with the 6-month-old and has lower frustration tolerance. That's absolutely true. So one of the things that you might do tomorrow morning with him is point it out and say to him, hey, I need some ideas. When you start to get frustrated, what do you think will help? And this is an opportunity to build that list of things that help him self-regulate. If he says to you, well, when I get really frustrated, it helps for me to sit on my bed underneath a pile of my favorite stuffed animals, then you're not sending him to his room in timeout when he gets like that. You're saying, hey, I think you're having that feeling of being more frustrated. Do you want to go do that thing? And I'll pile you under a pile of stuffed animals and you see how long you can keep that pile from falling over. Or he might say to you, well, if we could turn up a music and have a dance party, if that's not when you're trying to nap your 6-month-old, then that's okay. And then you can say to him, because hitting is never going to be okay. So even though late afternoons seem to be hard for you and you're getting more easily frustrated, I can't make it okay for us to hit each other. I want to give you a tip. One of the really flat out questions that I've always asked my kids when they start to hit each other is I will stop them and say, hey, do you want to live in a hitting family? Would you want to live in a family where when any of us were frustrated, including the grownups, it was okay to hit? They always say no. And you're not threatening, like if you hit him, I'll hit you. You're saying, we don't want to live in a hitting family. In our family, when we're mad at each other, we tell each other, but we don't hurt each other. We never hurt each other on purpose. So that gives you an opportunity to have that conversation where you can say, I have empathy for your feelings and there are boundaries. Kids want both. And that's what I said to that mom this morning who said, a month ago, I would have given my kiddo consequences for this, but now I don't because I understand he's dealing with all these big feelings and I have so much empathy, it doesn't seem right to give him consequences. I want to stop here and tell you about a research study that was done at a children's hospital. On this children's hospital, they happen to be the premier transplant children's hospital in the world. So they have a lot of kids in this hospital who've had multiple organ transplants and end up having to live on that floor at the hospital for 7 to 12 months. This research study is really interesting to me because they interviewed the kiddo, the patient, the parents, the siblings of the kiddo, and the nurses to divide the families into two groups. One group where that sick kiddo was held to the same behavior standards in terms of how they treated people, being kind, being thoughtful, not hurting people on purpose or being mean. They were held to the same behavior standards as they had been before they got sick or as their well siblings were. Same rules. The other group were families that were like, you know what, this is too hard. This kiddo is dealing with something unimaginable. We don't have the same rules for that kid that we do for our well siblings or that we did before they got sick. And you can totally understand why they would feel that way. But here's the thing I find most compelling. The kids in the group where no matter how hard things were for them, they were held to the exact same standards of being as kind as they could be, not being mean on purpose, not hurting people on purpose. They had fewer hospital days and they had fewer antibiotic days. Their bodies got healthier a little faster because kids are really benefited by boundaries. They need empathy. You're mad. You didn't like that. You wanted that cookie. You didn't want your brother to make noise right now. You wanted my attention. Real empathy, not sarcasm, not yelling at them, real empathy. But in our family, we don't hurt each other on purpose. So now you need to go sit in that chair and we'll talk about it in a minute after I help your brother because he's sad because you hit him. When we give kids empathy and boundaries, they feel less scared. Okay, I find FaceTime and Zoom calls can be fairly upsetting after we end the call. How do we address missing friends? So if the upset at the end is much bigger than the enjoyment during, then that kiddo might not be benefited by those. But if they enjoy them very much and they miss them very much, then just empathy. Yeah, I really, notice when they're having a good time. I really love how much you're enjoying being with your friend. And afterwards, it is hard when we have to say goodbye to people. It is, saying goodbye is hard. Do you want to draw a picture of what you want to talk to them about tomorrow when we do this again? Do you want to listen to music that you like? And again, if you can, have that list. Use that time to go back to those soothing behaviors, those safe, healthy, soothing behaviors that you guys have made a list of. But something being hard, you guys, this is something really big that I'm going to say. And it's one of two things I want to really remind you about childhood. It's this. Uncomfortable, which is certainly what you guys are describing your kids feeling and you're feeling, uncomfortable is not unsafe. That's a big deal, right? Uncomfortable is hard and it's uncomfortable and it's icky. It's not unsafe. As a matter of fact, when your kids are uncomfortable, that's when they're learning. That's when they're learning how to change, how to grow. We don't grow when we're comfortable. We don't learn new skills when we're comfortable. So that discomfort, it's not dangerous to them. It may actually be valuable. The other thing I want to remember to stop here and say is something that all of your early childhood educators know and use and work on, and that will make sense if you haven't heard it before as soon as I say it. Your kids' behavior is often their communication. behavior is communication. This isn't only true of kids, actually. Think about your parenting partner or a really good friend. When they start to behave differently, you're like, what are they trying to tell me? What are they feeling? When you behave differently than you were expecting to, when you usually enjoy something and then don't, or you find yourself more irritable and it surprises you, when your own behavior surprises you, that's when you clue in, wait, what am I feeling? What just happened there? What bothered me? So please remember that your kid's behavior is communication. So if their behavior is frustrating you, and that might be why you're on this call. You might be like, yeah, I am seeing some stuff I don't love, especially for kids who aren't yet so articulate or don't have as much practice talking about their feelings. When you see them eating differently, sleeping differently, behaving differently towards their siblings, not enjoying the things they used to enjoy, or perseverating about something that they didn't used to perseverate about, it's okay to feel frustrated and try to get curious too. What's going on? Okay, the roughhousing seems to have increased a lot. How do we get their energies out or help them direct their energies? Sorry, my keyboard isn't working. I like that your Y's were all replaced with Z's. It felt very hip. So and I'm showing you how not hip I am by using that word. When you're seeing that your kids need to get more physical energy out, then I really want you to rely on the internet. There are amazing free exercise videos and challenges to do push-ups and to do jumping jacks. And no matter how small the space you're in, although I grew up in a tenement in the Bronx and I know jumping jacks would not have been okay with Mrs. O'Harris, who lived right down below us, but anything that you can do. The YMCA has amazing resources that are all free for their exercise classes for kids of all different ages as well as adults. Many of your JCCs have been working their tails off in the last 2 weeks, creating virtual experiences. And not only for adults, they know they serve kids. So find out what's going on at your JCC so that you have the opportunity to take advantage of some of those things. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. I'm struggling with how to work from home and interact with my kids in meaningful ways while I try to get work done. My husband's working overnight, so he's not always here or awake to help. I get that. When our kids were really young, their dad was an emergency medicine resident, and actually he was raising them while I was a resident, working 36-hour shifts. I completely get that experience of trying to single parent and also work. A couple of things you can do with a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old is give them some work that they can do. But remember, they can do something for like 15 minutes. Don't think that you're going to get to settle into an hour-long meeting. And the biggest reason for frustration in families is unmet expectations. So the first thing you have to do is moderate your expectations. Sometimes you have to moderate your coworkers' expectations too. Yes, I can take that Zoom call for an hour if you guys don't mind that you're going to see my kids on my lap, and I'll try to remember to mute myself when I have to tell them and redirect them and help them with projects that they're working on. Here's, I think, a small silver lining to this experience. Nobody has to pretend they're not working from home with their kids crawling all over them. Everybody knows that. The only reason you're not seeing any of my kids right now is because it is 11:45 at night. Any other time during the day, you probably get to meet all of them and my dog. So moderate your expectations first, and then break things out into really small bites and small chunks. And if you can, reserve their special coloring book or their cool project that they're working on, their Lego thing, whatever it is. Like, let's say, for example, that your 6-year-old is allowed to work on Legos only when your 3-year-old naps because of the choking hazard issue. So what I want you to consider doing is being like, okay, when the 3-year-old is napping, I'm going to do my work, my project, and you're going to do your project. And I'm going to make a space for you here on this big person desk, or we're going to sit together at the kitchen table, and you're only allowed to be up here doing that while you're having your work time. So work time, that means quiet time. Work time means, and I want to teach you guys a trick, a hack that I really meant to include about how teaching kids to interrupt you respectfully, okay? Only if you interrupt me in the way that we talked about. Have some boundaries around it and do that thing we're really good at. Make them feel special. This is our special big kid time because this is stuff that the 3-year-old just doesn't know how to do yet, but I think you can handle it. Do you want to try? Here's that hack for teaching kids to interrupt you respectfully, because it's not really reasonable to consider that they won't interrupt you at all. And if something bad's going on, you want them to interrupt you, right? So here's what I want you to teach them. I want you to teach them this skill. And I have a video of it on my YouTube channel, doing it with my 4-year-old from some years ago. So hopefully you can watch that with your kiddo, and that'll help them too. They like to see other kids doing what you're teaching them. What you're going to teach them is that if you want my attention and I'm on the phone or talking to another adult on my computer, I want you to come up and put your hand on my arm and leave it there, not hitting me. Just gently place your hand on my arm and leave it there. I'm going to put my hand over your hand. That's how you know that I know you're there and I know you're waiting for me. And I'm just looking for a way to respectfully, politely excuse myself for a second from the conversation I'm in. So here's what that looks like. They come up to you, mom, 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 dad, 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 dad. And you look at them and they put their hand on your arm. You put your hand on their hand. You finish what you were doing with that person. You say, yes, absolutely. Hey, can you hang on one second? I need to answer my kiddo. The person says, sure. You look at them and say, what is it? And that's when you can let go. But I always tell my kids, leave your hand there until you actually have me looking at you and talking to you, because I could get distracted and forget. I'm a very bright, shiny object kind of person. This is a nonverbal, respectful way that they can learn to interrupt you. Assuming that they won't interrupt you it is a sucker bet. So I really want you to have this hack that you teach them, and it will work after coronavirus is over. This is actually something that my kids do to this day, even though I taught them when they were really young. And it's really nice because I want them to know they should come to me when they need something, but they don't get to verbally or physically insert themselves into the conversation between me and the person I'm talking to. If only I could teach my dog to do this. That would be really awesome, right? Okay, looking for the next question. A challenge here.
Respectfully interrupt you.
Yeah, please do it. Mackenzie, what's up?
We missed a question earlier on from Colette. She asks, I find FaceTime/Zoom calls can be fairly upsetting after we end the call. How do we address missing friends?
So this one I did try to answer, so I'm sorry if I didn't get a complete answer out, but what I want to say about that idea of missing friends is that you can have absolute empathy for that. And actually, one thing I didn't say before is you could put that in the hands of your child. You could say, is this too hard? Would it be easier to not do this tomorrow, to not have that time? And let them try that. And if they're bored or if they mention missing their friends, be like, okay, so we tried it both ways. We tried it with seeing them and then it's hard to say goodbye. We tried it with not seeing them. Which is easier? Which do you like more? And not because you know the right answer, but because they get to try stuff out and see how it works out. A challenge here, staying patient and kind when the kids seek attention or have conflict with lots of screaming. At the exact moment, both parents have work calls. I mean, when else would they do that? It's perfect, right? I think it's in their union rules that they have to do that. So what I want to say is giving kids boundaries that say, and you can have a sign, like a working available sign that's a red and a green that you flip right next to you. And I'm not assuming you have a door you can close. I'm assuming you're all there in one space that says, this is library voices time. This is recess voices time. That might be something that's useful for a kid who's old enough to have had that experience so far at school. But either way, there's both having boundaries and having empathy for how flippin' hard that is as a kid. Sometimes they are seeking attention. They are heat-seeking missiles as soon as you get into a conversation with another adult, whether it's for work or anything, that they're like, hey, I see, my spidey sense just knew that you were paying attention to someone besides me. La, 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 pay attention. And if trying to get your attention doesn't work, I'm pretty sure that a great way to get your attention is to try to beat my brother bloody. Maybe that's only in my house. But to say, hey, I want you guys to be able to have each other while we're working. But if you can't handle that, we'll separate you guys. Geographically, you might say, I don't have much room to separate. But if you have to say, your tushy has to be in contact with that chair and your tushy has to be in contact with that chair, you have 30 seconds to go gather up whatever from your room or a bunch of things you guys want to be able to play with. Those things go in the middle. Take one thing, go to your chair, and you have to raise your hand to get down and switch it with something else that's in the middle, not what your sibling is playing with. So you can do some of those cage match kinds of things to try and help your kids see that if they can handle it for your 15 or 20 minute call, then they can have a little bit more freedom. And if they can't handle it, you're going to give them a ton of rules so that you can, still earn a living. My child is breaking out eczema and has stomach aches every day. Are these signs of anxiety about the present circumstances? And if so, how do we deal with kiddo anxiety? So I don't know if this is signs of anxiety in your kiddo, or if they just actually are having some kick up of their eczema, and often kids with eczema have some GI issues too. You probably do know. So if you have a sense that it might be anxiety, it absolutely might be. And kids show up with anxiety in lots of different ways. And no matter what's going on, we deal with it in a lot of really similar ways. First of all, I want to remind you, you have early childhood experts, the educators at your JCC who know your kiddo, not as well as you do, but really well, and have tons of education and training and professional experience in this. They miss your kids. They're thinking about them. So you may very easily be able to get permission from the director of your preschool to send an email that they'll forward on to your kiddo's teacher saying, hey, these are the things I'm trying, but I think my child is feeling anxious. What else could I try? They may have some great resources. Sesame Street Workshop has some fantastic resources for helping kids with worry. Looking at videos about characters that are feeling worried, asking your child to tell you a story about another kiddo who's staying home with their family in a place that looks a lot like yours, and not in any kind of tricky way, just like, hey, I've asked you a lot about your feelings. Will you tell me a story about another kiddo and what they might be feeling and what might help them? Having them draw pictures, having them play and pretend with stuffed animals, and saying, well, my stuffed animal is having a lot of itching and tummy aches. What do you think might be going on? And what do you think might help? But I want to mention that if your child experiences worry and physical effects when things are hard, they might always. So understanding that those are some clues for them that they might need, that for them to start learning, like, hey, when this happens, sometimes it's also partially because of your feelings. So what can we do to help your feelings? Because that might help your stomach ache and that might help your itching. That's a really important conversation to have. That's really valuable. In addition to calling your primary care doc, having a telemedicine visit, and getting the right medicines for their eczema. I'm due with our second child in 2 weeks. We'd hope to spend some time with our 3-year-old individually and have the baby brought in to meet all of us together. With the changes in hospital visitation, we can't bring our 3-year-old to the hospital, and we'll have to introduce him to the baby when we come home. Any suggestions or tips on the first meeting? Yeah, and there are a lot of great resources out there about this, but a couple of ideas that I want to offer you is have a gift. Thanks for being my big sibling gift that the baby is going to bring home from the hospital then. I mean, keep it in the trunk of your car, but brings in when they come in. And have a picture, and they helped whatever adults staying home with the 3-year-old, have them help them decorate and put up a sign on the door that says, welcome home baby, and have them make or pick, but better to make some sort of gift that they can give to that baby, because this is pretty cool. And most kids meet their sibling for the first time either after they were born a while, after like a day or two in the hospital, or when they come home from the hospital. And that's not going to be damaging for your 3-year-old. I know you had a picture of how this is going to be, and that the current circumstances have changed a lot of people's pictures of those kind of in the weeds details that you gave a lot of thought to. But it's not going to ruin your 3-year-old's expectations or experience of this new baby. They're going to think it's really cool sometimes, and think it's really awful and stupid sometimes, and want you to put the baby back sometimes, and want you to let them, only them, carry the baby around by their head sometimes. And none of that's going to be because you didn't get an opportunity to make this perfect. It's never perfect, and it's always perfect, because you're getting to grow your family in a way that's going to be really great. And you're giving that sibling, that older sibling, a person that's going to be in their lives forever. And that's really neat. So do what you can to give yourself some grace and compassion and not be too stressed. I have to tell you that one of the truths of having your second child is that you spend a lot of unnecessary time feeling guilty towards your oldest, because without their permission, and really without their consent, because they don't know what they're getting themselves into, you're changing their whole world. But that's okay. That really is okay. And interestingly, as soon as that new baby's born, you start to look at your 3-year-old like they're baby Huey with germs, and they're like these hulking monsters. And then you're like, oh, I have to protect my tiny baby from that huge toddler, whom I totally love with all my heart. And it happens to most people in both of those ways, and everybody works out just fine. And Heather says to you, congrats on the new baby. Hey, we're almost out of time, and I do have a couple of things I want to leave you guys with, but I'm gonna get to that one more question that just popped up from Melanie. Any suggestions for our daughter's 6th birthday that will happen when we're all under stay-at-home orders? we could reschedule her party, but how can we keep this from being her sad coronavirus birthday? I'm going to say start by not calling it that, like just as a beginning. I mean, maybe for you guys, you can call it SCB, just between the, you know, the adults in the house. That's totally fine. But with her, I would say, I would try and spin it the other way. I would say, you, for the first time in your whole life, and most kids never get this, you get the special private VIP birthday. And let her help you within limits design her day. Say for that one day, maybe flip something. You're in charge of the schedule, or you're in charge of the menu. Plan it out beforehand, because stores and shopping. But give her a lot of autonomy and say, wow, we've never even thought about having a 6-year-old birthday like this. I don't know anybody who's ever gotten to have a 6-year-old birthday like this. I guess we could have a big Zoom party with everybody wants to wish you a happy birthday, but that would probably be like 20 people. And if she's the kind of kid who thinks that would be amazing, be like, and maybe you'd have to wear a tiara so that with all the pictures on screen, they would know who the birthday person was, right? Or maybe she doesn't want to do that. Maybe that doesn't sound great to her, and she would like to have appointments where they get to visit the birthday person, or birthday princess, or birthday turtle, or whatever makes sense to her, and have appointments. One of my friends years ago, he had just moved to a new city with his wife, and he was the rabbi of the community, and she was feeling a little bit like she was the and wife. And so for her 30th birthday, he had everybody set up appointments with him on a calendar, and every 15 minutes she heard from somebody she hadn't heard from, and had this really, truly amazing day. For a 6-year-old, that would be a little bit of overstim, but you could absolutely have a 5-minute appointment every half hour with a different person checking in and saying, you know, please make a noisemaker, or wear a funny hat, or if your daughter has a particular interest, have them do something for her that's about that interest. There's no limit to our creativity. And that brings me to how I wanted to end this. We have this opportunity to get creative. And doesn't mean you have to be crafty. Lord knows I'm not. I can't draw my way out of a wet paper bag. And it doesn't mean you have to be super organized. It just means you have to, on occasion, be intentional. Not all the time. 85% of this is just inventory management. Do I have all the kids? Do they have all their stuff? Have they been fed? But every once in a while, be intentional and a little creative to say, you're right, we can look at the things we can't do. And I just want to remind you, change, which is certainly something we're all experiencing, the first step of change for everyone is loss. The very first thing our brains do, even with the change we wanted, is count what we'll lose. And then we experience some distrust. And I have a graphic of this, if it would be helpful, that I can send you if you jump on my website or get in contact with me. Follow me on Instagram if you want to, or Facebook, and I'm happy to be in touch. But then distrust. Do we really have to go through this change? Is this really going to happen? And then even when we start to accept that it's going to happen, we feel the discomfort. And many of us are still in that discomfort or distrust or discomfort part of the cycle. But the thing that happens right after that is choices. We start to realize that we have choices. And once we start to make some choices, we have the step that is engagement. And we're engaged. And that engagement leads to the part we really, really want, which is reunification. We start to come back together, maybe just being aligned with who we wanted to be or how we wanted to be or the feelings we're looking for, to be more realigned and reunified with our family, with our community. Watch your JCCs. They also felt the loss of you and the distrust that they really had to close their doors or have less programming. And then the discomfort of how were they going to connect. And then they realized they had choices beyond their walls. And they started to make those choices and engage with you, and you're starting to engage with them. And we're getting to this place of reunification. Every change causes that cycle. It causes it in little kids, and it causes that in us. And what we need is not to prevent change, but practice managing it. And that's what you're giving your kids. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you so much, Dr. G. This was a really remarkable evening again. Mackenzie put Dr. G's website in the chat. And if you'd like to, you can be in touch with us for the recording. I think it will probably also be on Dr. G's website. So do that. That'll be ready in about a week. And if you love this so much and just want to hear it again and hear different and new questions, please join us next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Just let us know and we'll send you a place to register. You can see Instagram and Facebook on there. And once again, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your grace, and thank you for your thoughtfulness, and thank you for just being who you are. We're really very grateful.
I really appreciate it. It's really nice to meet all of you. I hope you will find me on Instagram or Facebook, just because it's really nice to connect with people who are going through this, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions that you have. Thanks for hanging in for the whole hour. And hi, Liza. Liza's from my JCC and my kids' preschool.
Yes, she is indeed. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you
Liza,
again